I bought a $2.5 million sanctuary in Buckhead to heal in peace after giving birth to my son. On our second night home, the heavy front doors burst open and my mother, my golden child sister, and her husband marched into my foyer dragging 7 massive suitcases. My mother tossed a cleaning invoice onto my entryway table, demanding I pack up my newborn and move down into the unfinished basement because my brother-in-law had dust allergies. When I stood frozen in disbelief, she crossed her arms and told me that if I did not like her new rules, I could pack my bags and get out of her house. She had no idea who she was actually talking to, or the catastrophic financial and legal nightmare they had all just walked blindly into. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to fiercely protect your peace against toxic family members who mistook your silence for weakness. The air in the nursery was perfectly still, smelling faintly of lavender and baby powder. I was sitting in the velvet rocking chair by the window holding my 2-week-old son Malik against my chest. His breathing was the only sound in the room, a soft rhythmic comfort that I had desperately needed. After years of brutal 60-hour work weeks, corporate battles, and isolating myself to build my career, this house was supposed to be my ultimate reward. It was a sprawling estate nestled deep in the affluent Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta, featuring vaulted ceilings, imported marble floors, and a sweeping staircase that looked like something out of a classic film. I had purchased it entirely in cash, a testament to my success as a forensic financial auditor. I spent my days dissecting complex corporate fraud, tracking missing millions, and holding powerful executives accountable. Yet despite my professional authority, I had never quite figured out how to audit the dysfunction within my own family. I was just easing Malik into his crib when the jarring sound of the heavy oak front doors crashing open echoed up the sweeping staircase. It was not a gentle knock or a polite ring of the doorbell. It was an invasion. Startled, Malik let out a sharp cry. I quickly scooped him back into my arms, my heart pounding against my ribs. I stepped out of the nursery and walked to the top of the landing, looking down into the grand foyer. There, standing on my pristine white marble floors, were my mother Brenda, my older sister Chantel, and her husband Connor. They were not alone. Behind them sat 7 massive hard-shell suitcases scraping aggressively against the polished stone as Chantel dragged them further inside. My mother stood at the center of the foyer, looking around with a critical, appraising eye, as if she were a real estate inspector evaluating a foreclosure. She wore her signature designer trench coat and a string of heavy pearls, her posture radiating an entitlement that had suffocated me for 35 years. Chantel, 32 years old and carrying herself like a reality television star, dropped her designer handbag onto my custom entryway table with a loud thud. Beside her stood Connor, a 36-year-old white man who carried an air of unearned arrogance like it was a tailored suit. My mother had always treated Connor like royalty, worshipping his supposed status as a high-level corporate consultant. He was the son-in-law she loved to brag about at her country club luncheons, the man who brought an illusion of elite corporate whiteness into our family dynamic, completely eclipsing my actual hard-earned success. Before I could even process the intrusion, Connor rubbed his nose dramatically and let out an exaggerated sigh. He complained loudly that the air quality in the house felt heavy, stating that his allergies were already acting up. My mother immediately swooped in to coddle him, patting his arm and apologizing on my behalf, as if I had intentionally pumped dust into the ventilation system to spite him. I slowly descended the stairs, clutching Malik tightly. I asked them what on earth they were doing barging into my home without a phone call. My mother did not even look at me when I spoke. Instead, she reached into her expensive leather purse, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, and tossed it carelessly onto the entryway table. It fluttered down, landing right next to Chantel's bag. "That is a cleaning invoice for $500, my mother announced, finally turning her sharp gaze toward me. "I need you to call them right now and get a commercial deep cleaning crew out here by tomorrow morning. Connor has severe dust allergies and he cannot be expected to sleep in a house that has not been properly sanitized. We are going to be staying here for the foreseeable future, and I will not have my son-in-law suffering because you do not know how to maintain a property." I stared at her genuinely, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of her words. I asked her why she thought they were moving into my home. Chantel scoffed, rolling her eyes as she began unzipping one of her massive suitcases right there in the middle of my foyer. "We need a place to stay while our condo is being remodeled," Chantel said, her tone dripping with condescension. "And obviously this house is huge. You are just one single woman with a baby. You do not need all this space. It is entirely selfish for you to hoard a massive estate while your family needs accommodations." My mother nodded in agreement, taking a step closer to the stairs. "Furthermore, Zora, you need to pack up that nursery upstairs. The fumes from whatever baby products you are using are going to trigger Connor's asthma. There is plenty of room down in the unfinished basement for you and the boy. You can set up a nice little space down there where the noise will not bother us. Connor needs absolute quiet for his consulting calls." The basement. She wanted me to take my 2-week-old infant, my fragile tiny son, and move him into a damp concrete basement with exposed insulation and no heating, simply so her arrogant husband could have peace and quiet. The sheer cruelty of the demand was staggering, but it was so completely on brand for Brenda. She had spent my entire life prioritizing Chantel's comfort over my basic survival. I felt a familiar cold knot forming in my stomach, but the tears she probably expected did not come. Instead, my mind shifted into the cold, calculating space I usually reserved for hostile corporate audits. I told her absolutely not, and that nobody was moving into the basement, let alone my newborn son. My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed terribly against the high ceilings. "Oh, stop acting so high and mighty, Zora," she snapped, her voice echoing with bitter resentment. "We all know the only reason you even have this house is because Connor was generous enough to give you those investment tips last year. You should be down on your knees thanking him. If it were not for his financial guidance, you would still be living in some cramped apartment, making a glorified bookkeeper's salary. You owe him this." The lie was so massive, so entirely detached from reality, that I actually felt my breath catch. Connor had never given me a single piece of financial advice. In fact, Connor barely understood basic tax law. I had bought this house using the millions I had earned through grueling high-stakes forensic audits, unearthing hidden assets for major law firms. I had built a formidable reputation in Atlanta, commanding top-tier rates for my expertise. Yet my mother had constructed an elaborate fantasy world where Connor, the white savior of the family, was the mastermind behind my wealth. She had sold this lie to her friends, her church, and her sorority sisters, completely erasing my achievements to elevate Chantel's husband. Connor stood there, hands in his pockets, offering a smug, self-satisfied smirk. He did not correct her. He simply soaked up the unearned praise, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch who had graciously allowed me to succeed. "It is the least you can do, Zora." Connor chimed in, his tone patronizing and flat. "Family helps family, and right now the family needs the master suite. Chantel is very stressed about the remodel, and she needs the jacuzzi tub to relax. You will be fine downstairs. It builds character." I gripped Malik a little tighter. My voice dropped an octave, losing any trace of familial warmth. I told them to pick up their bags and leave immediately. I stated very clearly that this was my property purchased with my money, and they were trespassing. My mother's eyes darkened, her face contorting into a mask of absolute fury. She took 2 aggressive steps up the stairs, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. She told me she was the matriarch of this family and that she made the rules. She declared that I had always been a bitter, jealous disappointment who could not stand to see her sister happy. "We are taking the master suite," my mother commanded, her voice ringing out like a gavel. "We are bringing our things upstairs right now. If you do not like the way I run things, you can pack your bags and get out of my house. Failures do not get to dictate terms to successful people." She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the frightened little girl who used to apologize just to keep the peace. But that girl was gone. Standing on those stairs was a woman who dismantled fraudulent empires for a living. And looking down at the 3 of them, I realized they had no idea they had just handed me the keys to their complete destruction. I am Zora, 35 years old, and I recently purchased a $2.5 million sanctuary in Atlanta to heal in absolute peace with my newborn son. But on our second night home, the heavy front doors burst open. My mother, my golden child sister, and her husband marched into my foyer, dragging 7 massive suitcases. My mother tossed a cleaning invoice onto my entryway table, demanding I pack up my baby and move down into the unfinished basement because my brother-in-law had dust allergies. She crossed her arms and told me that if I did not like her new rules, I could get out of her house. I simply stared at her and smiled. She had no idea who she was actually talking to or the catastrophic financial and legal nightmare they had all just walked blindly into. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fiercely protect your peace against toxic family members who mistook your silence for weakness. I stepped off the final marble stair, the soft fabric of Malik's blanket brushing against my arm. The $500 cleaning invoice sat exactly where my mother had thrown it, a crumpled white flag of her entitlement resting on my custom mahogany entryway table. I did not look at it. I did not reach for it. I simply kept my eyes locked on the 3 intruders who had just declared ownership of my sanctuary. Connor let out a sharp, irritated breath, clearly offended by my absolute refusal to comply with his sudden demands. In his fabricated world, a world meticulously funded by maxed-out credit cards, and my mother's delusional praise, his word was absolute law. He closed the distance between us, with heavy, deliberate steps, his shoes echoing sharply against the imported stone floor. He stopped mere inches from my face. The scent of his overpriced, heavily applied cologne mixed with the stale airplane air clinging to his suit was suffocating. He raised his hand, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly between my eyes. "You need to drop the attitude right now, Zora." Connor demanded, his voice thick with a practiced corporate arrogance that I immediately recognized as entirely hollow. "You are acting entirely out of line. Your mother is trying to help you manage a property you clearly have no business running alone. I am stepping in because someone has to be the adult here." I stared at that finger. It was the finger of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire 36 years of life. My expert eyes quickly took in the details that my mother deliberately ignored. His luxury watch was a decent replica, but the weight of the metal was wrong. His suit was off the rack, the tailoring sloppy around the shoulders. As a forensic financial auditor, my entire career was built on spotting discrepancies. I spent my days dissecting complex corporate fraud, tracking missing millions through offshore shell companies, and holding powerful deceptive executives accountable. I stripped away illusions for a living. Yet my mother, Brenda, practically vibrated with pride behind him, completely blind to the reality of the man standing in my foyer. For years, Brenda had worshipped Connor. To her, having a white-collar son-in-law was the ultimate status symbol, the crowning achievement she paraded around her elite country club luncheons in Atlanta. She treated his vague title of corporate consultant as if he were running a global empire. Meanwhile, my decade of grueling work, my accounting degrees, and my undeniable success were routinely dismissed at Sunday family dinners as glorified bookkeeping. Brenda loved the illusion of Connor's wealth far more than the reality of mine, simply because his illusion validated her deeply ingrained biases. Connor leaned in closer, his face turning a blotchy red as I refused to shrink away from him. "Do you understand how this works?" he asked, speaking slowly, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a toddler. "As the only experienced financial consultant in this family, I am the financial head of this household. I legally oversee our collective assets. Your mother asked me to step in because you are clearly overwhelmed, emotionally unstable, and incapable of managing this level of real estate. We are doing you a massive favor by moving in and taking over." I adjusted my hold on Malik, keeping my heart rate steady so my son would not feel the absolute rage coursing through my veins. "Your collective assets," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and perfectly level. "You mean my house? The house I closed on 2 weeks ago? With my money?" Chantel scoffed from the doorway, aggressively crossing her arms over her designer blouse. It is not just your house, Zora. Stop being so greedy and selfish. We are family and family shares. Connor sneered, pulling back his shoulders to maximize his physical presence. Actually, it is not your house at all, legally speaking. He delivered this statement with a smug, triumphant grin, glancing back at Brenda for validation, which she eagerly provided with a vigorous nod. I ran the numbers with Brenda last week. Since you used my investment strategies as the foundational capital for your down payment, and since Brenda contributed to your upbringing, this property falls under the legal umbrella of a constructive family trust. I actually felt a laugh building in the back of my throat. It was a fascinating, almost pathetic psychological study watching a con artist try to outsmart a senior forensic auditor. A constructive family trust. He had strung together legal buzzwords he probably heard on a late-night television show, entirely confident that his unearned authority would force me to back down. He was banking on the lifelong dynamic Brenda had cultivated, the toxic dynamic where I swallowed my pride, absorbed their insults, and handed over my hard-earned resources just to keep the peace. He genuinely believed that because he looked the part and spoke with enough volume, I would simply fold and hand over the keys to a $2.5 million estate. I looked past him to my mother. You honestly believe this garbage, Brenda? I asked. You believe that because he wears a nice suit and uses fake corporate terminology like foundational capital, he somehow owns the house I bought with cash. Brenda stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble. Connor is a seasoned professional, Zora. He understands how high-level wealth management works at a level you simply do not. You balance spreadsheets for a living. Connor builds empires. He is protecting our family legacy. You should be down on your knees thanking God that he is willing to take on the burden of managing this massive estate, especially now that you are an unwed mother with a baby holding you back. The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the air thick and toxic. She was perfectly willing to strip me of everything I had built, perfectly willing to weaponize my newborn son against me, all to feed the delusion that she had married her golden child off to a titan of industry. Chantel chimed in, dragging another heavy suitcase across the threshold, leaving a faint scratch on the pristine floor. Just sign the management agreement, Connor brought Zora. It will make things so much easier for everyone. You can still live in the basement, but Connor will handle the deed, the maintenance, and the property taxes. We are protecting you from your own incompetence. They had actually brought paperwork. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They had marched into my home uninvited with luggage and fraudulent management agreements, fully expecting to stage a hostile takeover of my life. Connor stood there, his chest puffed out, waiting for my inevitable surrender. He honestly believed his aggressive posturing had won the day. He thought I was the weak, compliant scapegoat they had bullied for decades. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I did not cry. I shifted Malik, slightly securely supporting his fragile head with my left hand. With my right hand, I reached into the deep pocket of my tailored lounge pants and pulled out my phone. The bright screen illuminated the dimming afternoon light in the grand foyer. "What are you doing?" Connor snapped, his tone shifting instantly from arrogant to highly defensive. "Put the phone away, Zora. We are having a private family meeting. There is no need for outside distractions or tantrums." I ignored him completely. My thumb hovered over the screen. I tapped a single contact, hit the call button, and placed the phone face up on the entryway table right next to my mother's ridiculous $500 cleaning invoice. I pressed the speaker icon. The dial tone echoed loudly in the cavernous space. "Who are you calling?" Brenda demanded, her voice shrill with sudden, uncontrollable anxiety. "Zora, I swear to God, if you are calling one of your little friends to complain about us, I will pack up your things myself. You do not disrespect this family to outsiders." The ringing stopped. A sharp, intensely professional voice filled the foyer, cutting through my mother's hysterical threats. "This is Valerie. Go ahead, Zora." Connor's face twitched violently. His eyes darted from the phone back to my face. He tried to maintain his intimidating stance, but his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, his fake confidence faltering. "Valerie." I said, my voice smooth, calculated, and utterly devoid of the fear they so desperately wanted to witness. I have a severe situation at the Buckhead property. 3 individuals have unlawfully entered my home. They are refusing to leave the premises. They are attempting to claim ownership of my deed under a fabricated legal theory, and they are currently harassing me and my newborn son. Connor's jaw dropped open. Chantel froze completely, her hand still resting tightly on the handle of her oversized suitcase. Brenda's face drained of all color, her eyes wide with a sudden jarring realization that the script she had written for this encounter was rapidly burning to ashes. Hang up the phone, Connor ordered, his voice completely losing its confident boom, cracking slightly under the sudden immense pressure. I am warning you, Zora, do not make this a legal issue. We are family. I looked him dead in the eye, my expression hardening into absolute ice, and I told Connor he had just made a catastrophic legal error. I did not need to raise my voice to make my point, because the heavy mahogany doors of my formal dining room sliding open behind me did all the talking necessary. Stepping out of the room was Valerie. Valerie is not a family mediator, nor is she a friendly neighborhood attorney. She is a ruthless, highly specialized corporate lawyer who bills at $1,000 an hour, and she had been sitting quietly at my dining table, reviewing my latest forensic audit reports while I was upstairs putting Malik to sleep. But Valerie had not stepped out alone. Moving in perfect synchronization right behind her were 2 fully uniformed Fulton County Sheriff's deputies. I had requested their presence for a civil standby earlier that very morning. My mother, in her technological incompetence, had accidentally forwarded me an email confirmation from a luxury moving company the night before. She had booked them to transport Chantel and Connor's belongings to my exact address. I knew every single detail of their hostile takeover plan before their tires ever touched my driveway. The immediate shift in the foyer was palpable. Connor's face drained of all color, the smug, blotchy redness vanishing into a sickly, terrified pale. The arrogant sneer he had worn just seconds ago melted into absolute panic. He took a rapid, stumbling step backward, suddenly wanting to be as far away from my personal space as physically possible. Chantel gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she nearly tripped backward over her own oversized designer suitcase. My mother froze completely. Her posture remained rigid, but her eyes darted wildly between Valerie, the deputies, and me, her mind desperately trying to compute how her flawless ambush had instantly turned into a legal nightmare. Valerie did not waste a single breath on pleasantries. She walked directly up to Connor, her heels clicking with sharp authority, and extended a crisp white document toward his chest. "This is a formal criminal trespassing warning," Valerie stated, her voice echoing with absolute legal finality. "You are currently standing on private property owned exclusively by my client. There is no family trust. There is no shared asset agreement. My client is the sole title holder, the sole financier, and the sole legal authority of this estate. You have exactly 2 minutes to remove yourselves and your luggage from these premises, or these deputies will arrest you for trespassing and harassment." Connor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He tried to puff his chest back out, desperately clinging to the illusion of his corporate superiority. "Now hold on a minute," Connor stammered, his voice lacking all the booming confidence he had wielded against me. "You cannot just issue a trespass warning on a family member. I am a high-level financial consultant. I have fiduciary rights regarding my mother-in-law's investments, which were heavily leveraged to secure this property. You are making a massive mistake here." Valerie did not even blink. She tilted her head slightly, offering him a smile that was entirely predatory. "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her tone perfectly even. "Considering your own consulting firm has failed to file corporate tax returns for the last 3 quarters and currently holds a $0 balance in its operating account, I highly suggest you do not attempt to lecture me on fiduciary rights or asset management. You do not have a portfolio. You have a failing LLC. Now take the warning and leave." The complete shattering of Connor's savior illusion hung in the air. My mother let out a strangled gasp, her eyes wide with shock. She had worshipped Connor for years, bragging to her sorority sisters and country club friends about his imaginary wealth, deliberately ignoring my actual hard-earned success to elevate him. Hearing a high-powered attorney dismantle his entire financial existence in 2 sentences broke her brain. But Brenda was nothing if not fiercely dedicated to her own delusions. She turned her attention to the deputies stepping forward and adjusting her pearls. "Officers, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," my mother said, using the sweet, condescending voice she reserved for retail workers and service staff. "I am Brenda Hayes. I am a platinum member of the Buckhead Women's Association. This is a private family dispute. My daughter is simply suffering from severe postpartum depression, and she is not thinking clearly. We are here to help her. You can leave now. We will handle this internally." The taller of the 2 deputies looked at my mother with absolute indifference. Law enforcement in this particular zip code dealt with actual billionaires, corporate titans, and seasoned politicians on a daily basis. They were completely unfazed by a woman name-dropping a local social club. "Ma'am," the deputy said, his voice firm and unwavering, "the property owner has asked you to leave. Your daughter's attorney has provided documentation proving she is the sole owner. You need to gather your belongings and step outside immediately. If you refuse, we will place you in handcuffs. Do you understand?" Chantel finally broke out of her shocked silence. She let out a shrill, piercing scream, stomping her foot on the marble floor like a petulant toddler. "This is not fair," Chantel yelled, tears of absolute fury streaming down her face. "We gave up our apartment lease for this. We were supposed to have the master suite. You cannot do this to us, Zora. You are ruining my life." I stood silently on the stairs, holding Malik close to my chest, letting the absolute chaos of their eviction wash over me. I did not owe them an explanation. I did not owe them comfort. I only owed myself peace. The deputies stepped forward, closing the distance. They instructed Connor to pick up his bags. Connor, deeply humiliated and desperate to salvage some shred of his shattered pride, tried to argue back. He raised his voice aggressively, pointing his finger at the deputy, attempting to assert his fake authority one last time. It was a phenomenal mistake. The deputies immediately grabbed Connor by both arms. They did not ask him twice. They spun him around with practiced efficiency, forcing his arms behind his back and physically marching him toward the open front doors. Connor shouted in protest, struggling against their grip, his expensive leather shoes sliding awkwardly against the polished stone. As they forced him forward, Connor's grip on his belongings faltered. A thick, heavy leather portfolio, the one he constantly carried under his arm to look important, slipped from his grasp. It hit the marble floor with a loud, heavy thud. The brass clasp popped open upon impact, spilling a disorganized mess of manila folders, bank statements, and printed emails across my entryway. Chantel shrieked, abandoning her suitcases to run after her husband, as the deputies pushed him out onto the front porch. My mother followed right behind them, her face flushed with rage, pointing back at me and screaming that she was writing me out of the family will, a completely empty threat, considering she had lived off credit cards for the last decade. Valerie stepped forward and firmly pulled the heavy double doors shut, securing the deadbolts with a satisfying series of metallic clicks. The sudden silence in the foyer was breathtaking. The screaming, the entitlement, the toxic weight of my family had been completely expelled from my sanctuary. I let out a slow, deep breath, resting my chin against Malik's soft hair. He had slept through the entire ordeal completely unbothered. I walked down the remaining stairs and handed my son carefully to Valerie, who held him with a gentle, protective smile. I turned my attention to the mess Connor had left on my floor. I crouched down, gathering the scattered papers to throw them in the recycling bin. I brushed a glossy real estate prospectus aside and my hand stopped dead. Lying beneath it was a freshly stamped document from a major commercial lender. My forensic auditor instincts flared instantly. The layout, the routing numbers, the specific typography, I recognized all of it. It was a finalized, approved commercial business loan application for $150,000. But it was not the massive dollar amount that made my blood run ice cold. It was the signature line at the bottom of the final page. The primary borrower listed was one of Connor's obscure shell corporations, But the financial guarantor, the person legally on the hook for the entire $150,000 debt, was me. Printed clearly on the finalized document was my full legal name, my stolen social security number, my private banking routing details, and a completely flawless forgery of my signature. Connor had not just lied to my family about his wealth, he had stolen my identity to fund it. And based on the approval stamp in the corner, the bank had already wired the money. I walked to the heavy mahogany double doors, and through the deadbolts, the metallic clicks echoing sharply through the massive foyer. I engaged the secondary security system, securing my sanctuary against the toxic entitlement that had just infested it. Resolving the immediate physical threat of their trespassing had been the easy part. The silence that followed was heavy, contrasting violently with the ugly reality of the forged document sitting on my entryway table. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury reserved for victims, and I was a senior forensic financial auditor. I spent my life dismantling fraudulent empires and holding deceptive executives accountable. Connor had just handed me the exact blueprint to his own execution, and I was going to read every single page. I carried Malik upstairs, his warm, tiny weight, a grounding force against the storm of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I settled him safely into his crib in the nursery, turned on the soft white noise machine, and walked straight into my home office. I spread Connor's dropped leather portfolio across my large glass desk, pulling out my laptop and two secondary monitors. I picked up my phone and dialed the fraud department of the commercial lender stamped boldly on the top of the loan application. The hold music grated against my nerves, but I kept my breathing slow and measured. A representative named David finally answered his tone, carrying the standard detached script of a call center employee. I clearly identified myself, provided my social security number, and firmly stated that a fraudulent commercial business loan for $150,000 had been finalized under my legal name. David sounded highly skeptical, typing slowly on his end, before informing me that the application had been processed entirely online and verified through a stringent identity authentication check. He stated that the applicant had successfully bypassed their two-factor authentication linked to an older dormant email address of mine and had perfectly answered three highly specific personal security questions. I demanded he read the questions to me immediately. David hesitated, citing protocol, but the sharp, authoritative edge in my voice forced him to comply. He read them aloud. What was the name of your first grade teacher? What was the exact street you lived on in 1998? What was the name of your very first pet? I gripped the edge of my glass desk, the blood turning to ice in my veins. Connor had only been in our family for 4 years. Chantel barely remembered her own childhood, let alone the mundane details of mine. There was only one person on this earth who remembered that my first grade teacher was Mrs. Gable, that we briefly lived on Oakwood Terrace before the bank foreclosed on our house, and that my first pet was a stray tabby cat named Whiskers, my mother, Brenda. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Brenda had not just passively believed Connor's lies about his wealth. She had actively fed him the keys to my identity. She had sat down with her golden child's husband and willingly handed over my sensitive private information so he could secure a massive loan he did not financially qualify for. I could perfectly picture the justification in her mind. Brenda had undoubtedly convinced herself that because I was a single mother with a high income, I somehow owed my financial stability to a white man who had never worked an honest day in his life. She had willingly sacrificed my credit, my livelihood, and my newborn son's future, just to maintain the illusion that she had married her favorite daughter off to a corporate titan. She offered me up as collateral for Chantel's lifestyle. I instructed David to immediately flag the account for a full criminal investigation and hung up the phone. The betrayal was staggering, but I shoved the emotional weight of it into a tight box in the back of my mind. I cracked my knuckles and booted up the specialized tracing software I used for my corporate audits. I had to contain this massive financial crisis before Connor could drain another dime or attempt to open any additional lines of credit under my name. I pulled the routing numbers from the finalized loan documents. Connor thought he was a mastermind, but his execution was incredibly sloppy, reeking of amateur arrogance. He had funneled the $150,000 through an obscure limited liability company registered in Delaware. He assumed the standard privacy shields of a Delaware LLC would protect him from scrutiny. He did not realize that I pierced corporate veils for a living, routinely tracking hidden assets for multinational law firms. I bypassed the basic privacy layers in under 20 minutes. He had used a cheap online legal service to set up the shell company, leaving his own digital footprint, his IP address, and his personal metadata all over the initial registration forms. Once I breached the shell company's transaction history, I expected to see the funds moved into a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange or perhaps wired to an offshore account in the Caymans. That is what smart, seasoned criminals did when they wanted to hide stolen money. Connor was not smart. He was just a narcissist who believed he was untouchable. I pulled up the bank's IP logs from the exact moment the loan was funded. I traced the outgoing wire transfer directly from the Delaware Shell account to its final destination. I watched the progress bar load on my screen, waiting to see which shady vendor or secret account he had paid off. The destination code flashed on my monitor. The money did not go to a software vendor. It did not go to a commercial real estate holding company. It did not go to payroll or operational costs for his supposed elite consulting firm. The entire sum of $150,000 was wired directly to the administrative banking account of the Peachtree Elite Country Club. It was the most exclusive, notoriously old money institution in Atlanta. I stared at the bright white screen of my laptop, the pieces of their pathetic puzzle clicking together with sickening clarity. My mother and Chantel had been bragging for months about being accepted into this exact country club. They had rubbed it in my face during my baby shower loudly and obnoxiously discussing how Connor's immense generational wealth was finally opening doors for them in high society. They had mocked my decision to stay home and work, claiming I simply did not understand the networking power of the Atlanta elite. I opened a new browser window, navigated to the country club's public registry, and searched the new member announcements for the current quarter. There they were. Brenda and Chantel listed proudly as VIP lifetime members, smiling brightly in a professionally taken photograph on the club's homepage. I pulled up the club's financial requirements page. The initiation fee for a VIP lifetime membership at Peachtree Elite was exactly $75,000 per person. The math was flawless and infuriating. Connor had stolen my identity, committed federal wire fraud, and forged my signature on a massive corporate loan, all to buy his mother-in-law and his wife a country club membership so they could parade around Atlanta pretending to be rich. They had funded their social climbing entirely with my stolen credit. The glaring white light of my dual monitors reflected off the polished glass of my desk. I stared at the digital confirmation of the wire transfer to the Peachtree Elite Country Club, my mind running complex risk assessment algorithms. Connor had not merely committed a minor financial indiscretion. He had committed aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud. He had tethered my clean, impeccably maintained credit to a massive, unauthorized commercial debt. The jarring vibration of my cell phone violently shattered the quiet hum of the nursery monitor playing softly in the background. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow, deliberate breath, grounding my emotions and allowing the cold, analytical side of my brain to take complete control. I tapped the green icon, activated the speakerphone, and placed the device directly beside the forged $150,000 loan application. I did not say a word. I simply let the line open. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Brenda shrieked. Her voice echoed off the walls of my home office, shrill and vibrating with absolute unhinged fury. "Do you have any idea what you just did to us? We were standing in your driveway like common criminals. The neighbors were watching. Chantel is practically hyperventilating in the back of an Uber, and Connor is completely humiliated. You call your lawyer right now, and you tell her to cancel that ridiculous trespassing warning. We are turning this car around and coming back to claim the master suite." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass desk. Brenda, I said, my voice completely devoid of the hysteria she was projecting. I am looking at a finalized commercial loan application. It is for $150,000. It features my stolen Social Security number, my banking routing details, and a remarkably accurate forgery of my signature. There was a fraction of a second of silence on the line. It was not the silence of a mother horrified to learn her daughter had been the victim of a felony. It was the calculated silence of someone realizing they had been caught in a lie. The money was wired directly to the Peachtree Elite Country Club. I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I know about the VIP lifetime memberships. I know you provided Connor with the answers to my childhood security questions to bypass the bank's fraud authentication. I waited for the denial. I waited for the frantic apologies, for the realization that her precious son-in-law had dragged her into a federal crime. But Brenda did not back down. Instead, she doubled down with a level of narcissistic justification that genuinely took my breath away. "Oh, stop acting like such a victim, Zora." Brenda snapped, her voice dripping with dripping condescension. "It is just a temporary business loan. Connor is going to pay it back as soon as his consulting firm secures its next major contract. He just needed a little help getting approved because the banks do not understand the complexities of his corporate structure. He committed identity theft, Brenda. He committed federal wire fraud." "He is your brother-in-law," she yelled, her volume rising to a fever pitch. "We are a family, and families share resources. You have millions of dollars sitting in the bank, doing absolutely nothing, while your sister is actively trying to build a respectable life in this city. You know perfectly well that Chantel needs to maintain a certain standard of living to support Connor's career. They need that country club membership to network with the right people. How is Connor supposed to secure high-level clients if he is not seen at the right venues?" I sat back in my chair, staring at the phone. My mother was openly admitting that she considered my financial stability entirely disposable if it meant maintaining her golden child's social image. She was perfectly willing to risk my credit, my career reputation, and my ability to provide for my newborn son, all so Chantel could sip mimosas on a manicured golf course. "You actually helped him steal from me," I stated, laying the fact bare. "You handed him my private information to fund a country club membership, knowing I have a 2-week-old baby to provide for." "Do not use my grandson as an excuse to be cheap," Brenda retorted viciously. "You have plenty of money, Zora. It is completely unnatural for a woman to hoard wealth like a dragon, while the man of the family struggles to get a foothold. Connor is the head of this family now. You should be honored to help facilitate his success, but you cannot see that because you are too focused on yourself." Her breathing was heavy through the speaker, fueled by decades of unchecked entitlement. "This is exactly why you cannot keep a man, Zora. You are entirely too independent and hostile. Stop being a selfish, bitter single mother. Call the police, drop whatever ridiculous fraud charges you are trying to file, and apologize to Connor for embarrassing him. If you ruin his credit over a simple family loan, I will never forgive you." She did not view me as a daughter. She viewed me as an obstacle to Chantel's comfort and a convenient bank account for Connor's delusions. For 35 years, I had exhausted myself trying to prove my worth to this woman. I had paid off her credit cards, funded family vacations I was never invited to, and absorbed her relentless comparisons to my sister. I had always assumed that if I just achieved enough, she would eventually see me. But listening to her demand that I accept a massive, fraudulent debt to protect a man who had just screamed at me in my own foyer, the final fragile thread of my familial loyalty snapped. It did not break with a dramatic explosion of grief. It severed with the cold, sterile precision of a surgical scalpel. "Are you listening to me, Zora?" Brenda demanded, her voice echoing into the quiet room. "You will call the bank. You will authorize that loan. And you will stop this nonsense before you destroy this family." I did not argue. I did not defend my status as a mother. I did not scream. I simply reached out and tapped the red button on the screen. The call disconnected, plunging the office back into absolute silence. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled my keyboard closer and initiated a complete financial lockdown. I contacted all three major credit bureaus, placing an immediate hard freeze on my social security number. I logged into my private wealth management portals, shifting my liquid assets into highly secured restricted access trusts that required dual physical signatures to move a single dime. I locked down every piece of financial data connected to my name, ensuring that Brenda and Connor would hit a solid brick wall if they attempted to siphon another penny. Next, I opened my secure encrypted email server and drafted a formal, heavily documented report for Valerie. I attached the forged loan application, the IP tracking logs, the wire transfer confirmation, and the public registry screenshots from the Peachtree Elite Country Club. I requested that she immediately draft a civil suit against Connor Chantel and Brenda for fraud, identity theft, and financial damages to be filed alongside the criminal complaint. With my assets secured and the legal machine in motion, I turned my attention fully to the man who had confidently marched into my home and attempted to steal my life. Connor thought he was a high-level corporate consultant. He thought he could outmaneuver a woman simply because he spoke with a loud, demanding voice. He was about to learn why powerful executives paid me 7 figures to hunt down their missing money. I bypassed standard public search engines and logged directly into the FinCEN database, cross-referencing his name with the Georgia Secretary of State's corporate registry. I pulled up the primary LLC he used to secure the fraudulent loan. It took me less than 12 minutes to pierce the corporate veil. Connor did not have an office. He did not have employees. His supposed high-level consulting firm was registered to a virtual mailbox in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. I initiated a deep-dive background check running forensic tracing on the LLC's operational history. As the data populated across my monitors, a fascinating and terrifying picture began to emerge. Connor was not just a failed businessman living off his wife's family. He was a serial financial predator. He was currently named as a defendant in 3 separate civil lawsuits across 2 different states, all involving unpaid vendor invoices and breached commercial leases. But the most alarming discovery was a massive red flag buried deep within a secondary shell company he had registered under Chantel's maiden name. I rapidly decrypted the public tax filings for that specific entity. Connor had not just been scamming local businesses. He had been quietly filtering massive amounts of debt through Chantel's identity for the past 4 years, completely destroying her credit score while maintaining his own pristine illusion. My sister, the golden child, who had blindly trusted her husband's brilliance, was legally tied to nearly $500,000 in defaulted corporate debt, and based on the recent filing dates, the creditors were currently preparing to place a lien on the condominium she and Connor were supposedly remodeling. There was no remodel. They had been evicted. I sat back in my chair, staring at the sprawling web of financial ruin Connor had woven. Brenda had handed him the keys to my identity because she believed he was a king. She had no idea he was a drowning man frantically pulling down everyone around him just to keep his head above water. And now I was going to ensure he sank. The digital confirmation of the wire transfer to the Peachtree Elite Country Club reflected off the polished glass of my desk. $150,000. It was not just a number on a spreadsheet. It was the exact price of my mother's vanity. I pulled my keyboard closer and opened a secure portal to the Federal Public Access to Court Electronic Records System, commonly known as PACER. If Connor had resorted to stealing his sister-in-law's social security number to buy a country club membership, I needed to know exactly how deep his financial grave really was. I typed his full legal name and hit search. I bypassed the initial civil suits I had found earlier and filtered the database specifically for federal bankruptcy filings. The system churned for a fraction of a second before generating a highly detailed, devastatingly comprehensive docket. Connor Sterling had not merely suffered a bad business quarter. His supposed elite corporate consulting firm had officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation over 14 months ago. I rapidly scrolled through the attached asset schedules and creditor matrices. The documents painted a pathetic picture of a man who had absolutely nothing left to his name. His luxury vehicles were leased and currently flagged for repossession. His business bank accounts had been completely seized and liquidated to pay off a fraction of his outstanding state tax liens. The luxury condominium he and Chantel had been living in, the one they claimed was undergoing a massive stressful remodel, had actually been foreclosed upon by the bank and auctioned off on the courthouse steps 3 weeks prior. They had not come to my house because they needed a temporary place to stay during renovations. They had shown up with 7 suitcases because they were officially legally homeless. Connor was a complete financial ghost. He had no assets, no income, and a credit score that was practically non-existent. He was a walking shell of a man surviving purely on audacity and my mother's relentless enabling. But the bankruptcy filings only answered the question of Connor's desperation. It did not fully explain Brenda's willing participation in a federal crime. To understand my mother, you had to understand the terrifying hierarchy of Atlanta's high society, specifically the ruthless ecosystem of her alumni sorority sisters, and the affluent women who dictated social standing in Buckhead. Brenda's entire identity, her self-worth, and her daily oxygen were inextricably tied to how those women perceived her. For years, she had paraded Connor around their luncheons and charity galas, inflating his mediocre title into a global financial empire. She had weaponized his perceived wealth to secure her own status as the ultimate matriarch who had successfully married off her golden child to a titan of industry. If those women ever discovered the truth, if they ever found out that Connor was a bankrupt fraud who had just been evicted from his condominium, Brenda would become an instant social pariah. The humiliation would absolutely destroy her. When Connor lost everything, Brenda faced a catastrophic reality check. But instead of accepting the truth and dealing with the embarrassment, she chose to sacrifice me. She willingly handed over my private childhood security answers to a desperate bankrupt man. She authorized the theft of my identity and the leveraging of my pristine credit score to secure a massive commercial loan. And she did it all for one specific, highly calculated reason. I pulled up the official website for the Peachtree Elite Country Club. It was widely known as the most exclusive, notoriously old money institution in the city. A VIP lifetime membership, there was the ultimate shield against high society gossip. If you were on the VIP roster at Peachtree Elite, nobody questioned your bank account. Nobody asked if your condo had been foreclosed on. It was a fortress of reputation, and Brenda had used my stolen identity to buy her way inside. I clicked on the member portal, navigating to the club's public events calendar for the current month. The page loaded, and a massive, professionally designed banner advertisement filled my screen. The annual Women of Excellence Gala, proudly hosted and sponsored by VIP members Brenda Hayes and Chantel Sterling. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the ornate flowing text detailing the event. It was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. It was a highly exclusive high tea and champagne reception. Hundreds of wealthy Atlanta socialites, local politicians, and influential business owners were on the guest list. The event description promised imported caviar, custom floral arrangements, and a string quartet. But the absolute kicker, the detail that made a cold, dangerous smile spread across my face, was the scheduled keynote address. According to the itinerary, Chantel was slated to take the podium at 2:30 to deliver a speech titled Generational Wealth and Philanthropy Building, a Legacy of Excellence. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of it all was almost poetic. My sister, a woman who was currently legally homeless and married to a bankrupt fraud, was going to stand in front of hundreds of wealthy women and give a lecture on generational wealth. And she was going to do it while drinking champagne paid for entirely by my stolen credit inside a country club membership secured by my forged signature. They were hosting the social event of the season on my dime, completely confident that I would remain the quiet, compliant scapegoat sitting in their designated basement. I picked up my phone and drafted a quick, highly secure message to Valerie, updating her on the bankruptcy filings and the timeline of the loan disbursement. I knew she was already preparing the civil suit and coordinating with the district attorney's office regarding the identity theft and wire fraud charges. But white-collar justice is a slow, methodical machine. It requires weeks of depositions, grand jury subpoenas, and tedious legal filings. Brenda thrived in the shadows of delayed justice. If I let the legal system handle this quietly behind closed doors, my mother would simply spin the narrative to her friends. She would play the victim, claiming I was a bitter, jealous daughter, trying to ruin her life over a simple financial misunderstanding. She would use her country club status to manipulate the truth, painting herself as a martyr, while Connor quietly filed for bankruptcy again to wipe out the fraudulent debt. I could not allow that to happen. I could not allow Brenda to control the narrative for another second. The only way to truly destroy a narcissist is to rip away their carefully constructed mask in front of their chosen audience. I had to dismantle her illusion in the exact place where she drew her power. I checked the baby monitor on my secondary screen. Malik was resting peacefully in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, calming rhythm. I picked up my phone again and dialed my trusted, highly vetted private nanny. I requested emergency overnight and daytime coverage for the next 24 hours, offering triple her usual rate. She accepted immediately. My son would be safe, secure, and completely insulated from the collateral damage I was about to inflict. I stood up from my glass desk, the digital glow of the monitors casting long shadows across the walls of my home office. I walked out into the hallway and opened the heavy wooden doors to my custom-built walk-in closet. The space was meticulously organized, a testament to a decade of hard, legitimate success. I bypassed the comfortable high-end casual wear I had been living in since Malik was born. I walked straight past the silk blouses and the cashmere sweaters. I moved to the back of the closet to the section reserved exclusively for high-stakes corporate audits and hostile courtroom testimonies. If I was going to crash a VIP country club gala and dismantle a fraudulent empire in front of Atlanta's elite, I was not going to do it quietly. I reached out and let my fingers graze the immaculate fabrics. I was going to look exactly like the self-made millionaire I actually was. I pulled a striking razor-sharp designer power suit from its velvet hanger. Tomorrow afternoon, the women of excellence were going to get a masterclass in forensic accounting. The obsidian black Maybach glided seamlessly up the winding oak-lined driveway of the Peachtree Elite Country Club, the tires crunching softly against the meticulously raked gravel. I sat in the spacious rear cabin, breathing in the scent of rich leather, feeling an absolute glacial calm radiating through my entire body. I had spent the morning nursing Malik, kissing his soft cheeks, and locking down every single financial vulnerability in my portfolio. Now it was time to perform a very public autopsy on my family's fraudulent existence. I was dressed for a corporate execution. I wore a tailored emerald green Tom Ford suit that cut a sharp, commanding silhouette paired with vintage gold hardware that practically hummed with quiet, undeniable power. My hair was pulled back into a flawless, severe chignon. I wore no heavy makeup, only a signature red lip that felt like war paint. Nestled securely against my chest, in a custom charcoal gray luxury baby wrap, was my son Malik. He was fast asleep, his tiny hands curled into fists against the silk lapel of my jacket. I was not about to leave him with a nanny while I dismantled the people who had threatened his future. He was my motivation, my grounding force, and my silent witness. The vehicle came to a smooth halt under the massive ivy-draped portico. A valet in a crisp white uniform immediately rushed over, opening my door with a practiced deferential nod. He took one look at the vehicle, the tailoring of my suit, and the absolute authority in my posture, and immediately lowered his eyes in respect. He did not ask for my name. He simply offered his hand to assist me out. I handed him a $50 bill, without a word, adjusted Malik's wrap, and began my ascent up the sweeping limestone steps toward the grand entrance. Peachtree Elite was a fortress of Southern aristocracy. It was the kind of place where generational wealth was weaponized, where multi-million-dollar corporate mergers were sealed over 18-hole golf games, and where social standing was aggressively policed by women who communicated entirely through passive-aggressive compliments. The air in the grand foyer smelled of fresh hydrangeas, expensive lemon-scented floor wax, and exclusivity. A massive professionally printed banner hung directly in the center of the lobby, suspended between two soaring marble columns. It read in heavy gold script, "The Annual Women of Excellence Gala," hosted by VIP members Brenda Hayes and Chantel Sterling. I stood under the banner, the sheer, breathtaking irony washing over me. They were hosting a luncheon celebrating female excellence and generational wealth, fully funded by federal wire fraud and stolen identity. To my right, a set of heavy, gilded double doors led directly into the main ballroom. I could hear the gentle, melodic hum of a live string quartet bleeding through the wood, accompanied by the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the collective low-frequency hum of 200 wealthy Atlanta socialites networking. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the ballroom. "Zora!" The sharp, panicked hiss echoed across the lobby, slicing through the elegant atmosphere like a siren. I did not break my stride, but I turned my head slightly, marching aggressively across the Persian rugs, practically vibrating with a mixture of terror and fury, was Chantel. My sister had clearly spent hours trying to look the part of a seasoned philanthropist, but her desperation bled through every single styling choice. She was wearing a violently pink, overly structured designer dress that was entirely too loud for an afternoon high tea. Her wrists were stacked with heavy gold-plated bangles that clanked loudly with every jerky movement she made. She looked exactly like what she was, a bankrupt woman frantically trying to wear her stolen credit score on the outside so no one would ask to see her actual bank balance. She intercepted me just 10 feet from the ballroom doors, her chest heaving as she stepped directly into my path, physically blocking me from moving forward. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically around the lobby to ensure none of the other club members were watching our interaction. "What the hell are you doing here?" Chantel demanded, her voice an aggressive, breathless whisper. She grabbed my forearm, her manicured nails digging sharply into the emerald fabric of my suit. I looked down at her hand and then back up to her face. My expression did not change. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her with the cold, sterile detachment of an auditor examining a particularly pathetic spreadsheet discrepancy. "Let go of me, Chantel," I said, my voice barely above a murmur yet carrying the weight of an absolute command. "You are wrinkling, Tom Ford." A wrinkling Tom. Chantel yanked her hand back, as if she had been burned, but she refused to step aside. She shifted her weight, spreading her stance to maximize her physical block. "You cannot be here, Zora. This is a private ticketed event for VIP members and their invited guests. You are not on the list. You need to turn around and leave right now before I call security and have you dragged out." I adjusted Malik gently, ensuring his head was perfectly supported. "I am fully aware of what kind of event this is, Chantel. I read the country club itinerary. I see you are scheduled to give the keynote address on generational wealth in about 20 minutes. I am simply here to provide a minor addendum to your speech regarding how that wealth was actually acquired." Chantel's face drained of all color, the heavy layer of expensive foundation suddenly looking like a chalky mask against her panic-stricken skin. Her eyes darted wildly to the heavy doors of the ballroom. She knew exactly what I was capable of. She knew that I did not make empty threats. "Listen to me," Chantel hissed, stepping closer, her breath smelling of panic and cheap mints. "You are not going to ruin this for me. I have worked too hard to get into this circle. Mom and I finally have the respect we deserve. If you walk in there and start throwing your little jealous tantrums, you are going to destroy my reputation." "Your reputation?" I repeated, my tone dripping with icy precision. "You do not have a reputation, Chantel. You have $500,000 in defaulted corporate debt filed under your maiden name. You have a foreclosed condominium. You have a husband who runs a bankrupt shell corporation out of a strip mall virtual mailbox. And as of yesterday afternoon, you have a $75,000 country club membership funded entirely by my stolen social security number." She flinched violently, physically recoiling from the facts. But her lifelong conditioning kicked in instantly. Chantel had spent her entire adult life using me as a stepping stone. In high school, she had stolen my academic achievements to brag to her friends. In college, she had drained our mother's accounts, knowing Brenda would inevitably demand I cover the household bills to compensate. Chantel's entire existence was predicated on the belief that tearing me down was the only way to elevate herself. She genuinely believed that she was entitled to my resources simply because she desired a lifestyle she refused to actually work for. "You owe us this," Zora Chantel fired back, tears of immense toxic frustration welling in her eyes. "You sit in that massive house hoarding your millions while we struggle. Connor is a visionary. He just needed capital to get to the next level. If you were a real sister, you would have written the check willingly. You forced us to take matters into our own hands. Now turn around, take your baby and go to the servants' entrance in the back if you need to speak to management. You are embarrassing us by standing out here." It was the ultimate predictable manifestation of her narcissism. She was standing in the lobby of a club she had defrauded to enter, demanding I use the service elevator because my presence threatened her fragile criminal illusion. I did not waste another syllable on her. You cannot debate with a parasite. You can only detach from it. I squared my shoulders, securing Malik tightly against my chest. Chantel braced herself, lifting her chin and crossing her arms, fully expecting me to either engage in a screaming match or turn away in defeat. Instead, I stepped forward. I dropped my right shoulder and drove it directly into Chantel's collarbone. I did not shove her with my hands. I simply walked through her space with the unstoppable kinetic momentum of a woman who possessed absolute authority over her own life. The shoulder check hit her with a solid, heavy impact. Chantel gasped, the wind completely knocked out of her lungs. She stumbled backward, her heavy gold bangles clattering wildly as her designer heels twisted on the Persian rug. She hit the edge of a mahogany side table, completely losing her balance and collapsing onto a velvet lobby chair in a heap of pink fabric and breathless shock. I did not look back. I reached out and pushed both of the heavy gilded doors open with a sharp synchronized thrust. The bright cascading light of the crystal chandeliers flooded over me as the doors swung wide. The ballroom was breathtaking, filled with tables draped in white linen, towering floral centerpieces, and hundreds of affluent women turning their heads in unison toward the dramatic entrance. The string quartet in the corner faltered for a fraction of a second, the sudden intrusion breaking their rhythm. I stepped over the threshold, my emerald suit catching the light, my posture radiating absolute, uncompromising dominance. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead. Past the sea of shocked faces, past the rows of champagne flutes directly toward the grand stage erected at the far end of the room. And standing right in the center of that stage, gripping the brass stand of the main microphone, was Brenda. The heavy gilded double doors swung shut behind me, with a soft thud, sealing me inside the grand ballroom of the Peachtree Elite Country Club. The sheer scale of the room was designed to intimidate, featuring towering Corinthian columns, sweeping velvet drapery, and a sea of perfectly arranged round tables draped in crisp white linen. At the far end of the room, elevated on a mahogany stage, my mother stood behind a polished podium. She was bathed in the warm glow of a theatrical spotlight, gripping the microphone with both hands, wearing a tailored ivory suit that screamed old money. I began my walk down the center aisle. "Generational wealth is not simply about capital," Brenda projected into the microphone, her voice dripping with a practiced aristocratic cadence I had never heard her use inside our own home. "It is about cultivating a legacy of excellence. It is about teaching our daughters the value of preservation, responsibility, and the quiet dignity of upper echelon philanthropy." I kept my pace steady, my emerald green Tom Ford suit cutting a sharp, distinct line through the sea of pastel floral dresses and wide-brimmed fascinators. The women seated at the tables closest to the aisle began to notice me. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Crystal champagne flutes paused halfway to perfectly painted lips. They looked at the severe structural cut of my jacket, the uncompromising set of my jaw, and the sleeping newborn strapped securely to my chest in a charcoal gray luxury wrap. I did not look like a country club luncheon attendee. I looked like an apex predator who had just strolled into a petting zoo. My mother's eyes flicked up from her cue cards. She spotted me when I was exactly halfway down the aisle. Her voice faltered. The grand, sweeping sentence about family integrity died in her throat, leaving a jarring, ringing silence echoing through the ballroom speakers. Her grip on the edges of the mahogany podium turned bone white. She stared at me, her eyes widening in absolute unfiltered horror as her brain struggled to comprehend how I had bypassed her golden child in the lobby. I did not stop. I did not hesitate. I climbed the 4 carpeted steps leading up to the main stage, my heels sinking silently into the plush fabric. Brenda shifted her weight desperately, trying to use her body to physically block my access to the microphone. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a vicious, panicked whisper, completely inaudible to the audience below. "Get off this stage right now. You are ruining my event." I simply stepped around her. I did not shove her. I did not even graze her shoulder. I moved with the cold, unstoppable momentum of a glacier stepping directly into the center of the spotlight. I reached out and adjusted the flexible neck of the microphone, pulling it inches from my face. I raised my right hand and tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp, amplified thumps echoed like gunshots across the silent ballroom. 200 wealthy, influential Atlanta socialites stared up at me in absolute breathless silence. "Good afternoon, women of excellence," I said. I used the exact vocal register I utilized when delivering forensic audit findings to federal grand juries. Crisp, resonant, utterly devoid of emotion. "My name is Zora. I am Brenda's daughter, and I want to personally thank each and every one of you for attending this beautiful gala today." A soft ripple of confused, polite applause fluttered through the front rows. Brenda stood frozen to my left, a mannequin trapped in a nightmare. I continued, my voice easily carrying over the scattered clapping. "It truly is a breathtaking event. The imported caviar, the custom floral arrangements, the string quartet playing so beautifully in the corner. It takes an incredible amount of resources to host an afternoon of this magnitude. I am especially grateful to be here considering my mother and my sister Chantel utilized my stolen Social Security number to fund every single second of it." The collective gasp from the audience actually sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. A woman in the front row dropped her silver pastry fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. "You see, I am a senior forensic financial auditor," I stated, locking eyes with the club's board members seated at the center VIP table. "And yesterday afternoon, I discovered that the $75,000 initiation fees required for my mother and sister to stand in this room were paid for using a fraudulent commercial business loan. A loan secured by forging my signature, hijacking my clean credit, and committing federal wire fraud. There is no generational wealth here. There is only a bankrupt shell corporation, $500,000 in defaulted debt, and a desperate criminal illusion." Brenda lunged. She slammed her body against mine, her perfectly manicured fingers clawing frantically at the microphone stand to rip it away from my mouth. I stepped back smoothly, allowing her to take the podium, keeping my hands wrapped protectively around Malik. He stirred against my chest, letting out a soft, sleepy sigh, entirely safe from his grandmother's frantic violence. Brenda gripped the microphone, her chest heaving, her ivory suit suddenly looking deeply unkempt. She forced a bright, trembling, utterly psychotic smile onto her face, staring out at the sea of horrified socialites. "Please, please forgive my daughter." Brenda laughed, the sound brittle and manic as it echoed through the speakers. Her hands were shaking so violently the microphone stand rattled against the wood. "You must excuse her. She just had a baby 2 weeks ago. She is suffering from severe, untreated postpartum depression. She is having a terrible mental breakdown. We have been trying to get her psychiatric help for weeks, but she refuses to take her medication. She is completely delusional and prone to these wild, tragic hallucinations." I stood 2 feet away, my posture perfectly relaxed, watching her execute a playbook she had spent my entire life perfecting. Whenever I caught Chantel stealing my college savings to buy designer handbags, Brenda told the family I was paranoid and stressed from exams. Whenever I demanded repayment for the utility bills I covered, while Connor supposedly waited for a massive corporate payout, Brenda told her country club friends I was chemically imbalanced and pathologically stingy. Medicalizing my valid anger was her ultimate weapon. She routinely labeled me as crazy, emotional, and unstable to completely invalidate my truth and protect her golden child's fragile ego. She stood on that stage painting me as an unhinged, dangerous mother in front of 200 powerful women, fully expecting her gaslighting to work one final time. She expected the crowd to look at me with pity and look at her with deep maternal sympathy. But Brenda had severely miscalculated her audience. These were not her gullible relatives at a Sunday dinner. These were seasoned, ruthless Atlanta matriarchs. They looked at Brenda sweating and trembling, desperately clutching the podium. Then they looked at me. I was standing in a bespoke designer suit, my breathing steady, my newborn son sleeping peacefully against my chest. I did not look like a woman having a psychiatric emergency. I looked like a woman who brought receipts. The wealthy women in the crowd began whispering behind their linen napkins. Cell phones were discreetly pulled from designer clutches' screens, illuminating as they rapidly texted their husbands and personal wealth managers. The illusion of Brenda's elite status was dissolving in real time, washing down the drain, along with her stolen champagne. At the far edge of the ballroom, standing near the heavy velvet curtains of the service exit, a shadow shifted. It was Connor. He was wearing the same ill-fitting off-the-rack suit he had worn during his hostile invasion of my home. His face was slick with a heavy, terrified sweat. He had clearly sneaked in through the back, likely attempting to avoid the valet staff who would have undoubtedly recognized his repossessed vehicle. He stared at me standing on the stage, his eyes wide with absolute visceral panic. The walls of his fraudulent empire were crashing down directly onto his head. He knew that if the women in this room verified my claims, he would not just be publicly humiliated. He would be facing a federal indictment. Connor's gaze darted from the stage to the two massive, broad-shouldered men standing by the main entrance. They were Peachtree Elite's private security guards wearing dark suits and earpieces, their arms crossed firmly over their chests. Connor did not hesitate. He raised his arm, waving frantically to catch the guard's attention. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, his mouth forming desperate, silent commands. He stepped fully out from behind the velvet curtain, his face twisted in a mask of absolute desperation, violently signaling the security team to rush the stage. The two massive guards uncrossed their arms, their eyes locking onto me. They moved in perfect, intimidating synchronization, breaking into a heavy, determined sprint down the center aisle, pushing past the tables of horrified women coming straight for the stage to forcibly drag me out of the building. The two massive guards uncrossed their arms, their eyes locking onto me. They moved in perfect, intimidating synchronization, breaking into a heavy, determined sprint down the center aisle, pushing past the tables of horrified women coming straight for the stage to forcibly drag me out of the building. Brenda let out a sharp, victorious breath. Her shoulders relaxed, and a terrifyingly smug smile began to stretch across her face. In her mind, she had won. She had successfully deployed her favorite tactic, weaponizing my supposed mental instability, and now the muscle was arriving to sweep the problem out the back door. She stepped slightly to the side, giving the security team a clear, unobstructed path to tackle me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I kept my left hand firmly cradled against the back of Malik's head, ensuring my son remained undisturbed by the chaos erupting around us. With my right hand, I reached inside the perfectly tailored breast pocket of my emerald blazer. "Stop exactly where you are." My voice did not echo with panic. It cracked through the ballroom like a whip laced with an authority so absolute and unyielding that the two charging security guards instinctively dug their heels into the plush carpet, skidding to a halt just 3 feet from the edge of the stage. Their sheer momentum almost sent them toppling forward, but the conditioning of my command froze them in place. Right behind them, sprinting down the aisle, completely red in the face and out of breath, was the general manager of the Peachtree Elite Country Club. He wore a tuxedo with a gold lapel pin, and his eyes were wide with the sheer terror of a man watching a highly publicized high-ticket charity gala devolve into a physical brawl. "Remove her!" Brenda shrieked into the microphone, her facade cracking as the guards hesitated. "She is a danger to herself and her infant. Get her out of this room right now." I ignored my mother entirely. I looked down at the panting general manager who had just reached the base of the stage. I smoothly extracted a thick, heavily embossed legal document from my jacket. It was folded perfectly into thirds. "Mr. Vance," I assume I said, reading the engraved name tag pinned to his lapel, I highly suggest you instruct your men to stand down before you make a catastrophic career error. Mr. Vance looked up at me, his chest heaving. Ma'am, you are trespassing on private property. You need to leave the premises immediately, or we will be forced to physically assist you. I stepped forward to the very edge of the stage and held out the folded document. I am not trespassing, Mr. Vance, I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity over the dead silent ballroom. I am inspecting my property. I suggest you read the top page. He hesitated, his eyes darting to Brenda, then back to me. Reluctantly, he reached up and took the heavy parchment from my hand. He unfolded it. I watched his eyes scan the bold black text of the legal injunction and the attached certified property deed. It took exactly 4 seconds for the reality of the situation to hit him. I watched the blood rapidly drain from his face, leaving his skin the color of old ash. His mouth closed, and opened again. You are looking at a certified, legally binding injunction, I explained, turning my gaze to address the entire room of silent, captivated women. But more importantly, Mr. Vance, you are looking at proof of ownership. 2 years ago, when the Peachtree Elite Country Club was on the verge of bankruptcy due to severe mismanagement, the land beneath this very building was quietly sold to a commercial real estate holding company to satisfy your outstanding debts. I paused, letting the heavy, uncomfortable truth settle over the room. The old money matriarch sitting at the front table suddenly looked incredibly rigid. That holding company is Peachtree Commercial Holdings, one continued. And I am the silent majority shareholder of that group. I own the dirt you are standing on, Mr. Vance. I own the golf course. I own the tennis courts. I own the building. I am your landlord. And I hold the exclusive legal right to dictate operations when a federal felony is being actively committed on my premises. The power dynamic in the room did not just shift. It inverted with the violent, breathtaking force of a gravitational anomaly. Mr. Vance visibly trembled. He looked at the legal seal, then looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute sycophantic terror. He had been seconds away from authorizing the physical assault of the woman who held the lease to his entire livelihood. "Stand down," Mr. Vance barked, spinning around to face the 2 massive security guards. "Stand down immediately. Step back from the stage." The guards instantly retreated, lowering their heads and taking several large steps backward. Brenda let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. She dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden podium with a loud, abrasive screech of audio feedback, making several women in the front row cover their ears. "You are lying," Brenda stammered, her hands shaking violently. She looked wildly at the crowd, desperate to regain control. She is lying. This is part of her sickness. She does not own anything. She is a single mother making up stories. I turned to look at my mother. The sheer pity I felt for her in that moment was almost overwhelming. She was a woman who had spent 35 years worshipping the illusion of wealth, completely blind to the reality of how true power operated. "Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. "I pierce corporate veils for a living. I track hidden assets for multinational law firms. You genuinely believed that, because I do not wear flashy counterfeit designer labels, because I do not spend my days drinking mid-tier champagne at country clubs, that I was financially beneath you. I did not buy this land to brag to your sorority sisters. I bought it to diversify my portfolio." I looked past her, spotting Chantel hovering near the velvet curtains at the edge of the ballroom. My sister was weeping, her heavy mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streaks. The reality of her total social destruction was finally crashing down around her. "You spent your entire life trying to elevate yourself by standing on my neck, Chantel," I called out to her. "You conspired with a bankrupt fraud to steal my identity because you are fundamentally incapable of building your own life. You wanted to be a woman of excellence so badly that you committed a federal crime to stand in this room." I turned my attention back to the general manager, who was currently clutching my property deed like it was a live grenade. "Mr. Vance?" I said, my tone brisk and authoritative. "As the primary property owner, I am exercising my right to immediately terminate the memberships of Brenda Hayes and Chantel Sterling. Their initiation fees were paid using stolen funds which are currently frozen under a federal fraud investigation. They are no longer VIP members." They are trespassers. Yes, ma'am, Mr. Vance stammered, nodding so rapidly his glasses nearly slid off his face. Immediately, ma'am. I want them removed from the property, I ordered, pointing directly at Brenda, who was now clutching her chest, taking sharp, shallow breaths as the women in the audience stared at her with open, unapologetic disgust. I want them removed right now. Use the very same security guards you were going to use on me, and escort them out through the main lobby. Let everyone see them leave. Mr. Vance snapped his fingers. The two massive guards immediately moved forward. They bypassed me entirely and stepped up onto the stage flanking my mother. Ma'am, you need to come with us, the lead guard said, his voice entirely devoid of the respect he had shown her an hour prior. Do not touch me, Brenda shrieked, swatting at the guard's arm. I am a VIP. I am hosting this gala. The guard simply grabbed her elbow with a firm, immovable grip and began marching her down the steps. Across the room, two more security officers had already secured Chantel, grasping her by the arms and guiding her toward the center aisle. My sister was sobbing uncontrollably, trying to hide her face behind her hands as she was paraded past the tables of Atlanta's elite. The social execution was absolute. They were being dragged out of the very fortress they had defrauded me to enter. I stood on the stage, the heavy silence of the ballroom broken only by my mother's fading, hysterical protests. I adjusted Malik's wrap, pressing a soft kiss to the top of his head. He had slept through the entire collapse of Brenda's empire. I began my descent from the stage, walking calmly down the steps to retrieve my legal documents from Mr. Vance. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one whispered. No one made eye contact. They simply stepped out of my way, radiating a palpable, deeply ingrained fear. I reached the bottom of the stairs and began walking toward the lobby doors. Suddenly, a heavy shoulder slammed into mine. It was Connor. He had broken away from the security escort near the lobby entrance and sprinted back into the ballroom. His face was a horrifying shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging against his sweat-soaked collar. Two guards were rushing up behind him, but he managed to close the distance, leaning in so close I could feel the heat radiating off his panicked skin. He did not look like a man who had just been publicly destroyed. He looked like a cornered animal preparing for a final lethal strike. You think you won? Connor sneered, his breath hot and ragged against my cheek. You think you are so smart with your little real estate tricks? I did not back away. I stared directly into his bloodshot eyes. You are going to prison, Connor. It is already in motion. A dark, twisted smile cracked across his wet face. Oh, I might go down, Zora, but I am dragging you straight to hell with me. I did not just funnel that loan through my LLC. I funneled it through a secondary shell corporation, an offshore holding company I set up 3 years ago. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a vicious, triumphant whisper. And I used your signature to register it. I tied your social security number to a massive unregistered offshore account that has been dodging federal taxes for 36 months. The IRS is auditing you, Zora. You are not the victim in their system. You are the primary beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar tax evasion scheme. You are going to federal prison. Before I could even process the absolute horror of his words, the two security guards slammed into his back, grabbing him by the shoulders and violently dragging him backward toward the lobby doors. Connor threw his head back, laughing a manic, unhinged laugh that echoed through the crystal chandeliers above. I stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, the cold, clinical reality of my situation crashing down upon me. I had successfully dismantled my family's social illusion. I had reclaimed my power and my property. But Connor had planted a digital bomb deep inside my financial foundation, and the timer had just hit 0. I walked out of the Peachtree Elite Country Club and into the blinding Georgia afternoon sun. The valet brought my Maybach around in record time, his eyes wide as he held the door. I slid into the back seat, the heavy door shutting out the frantic shouts of reporters and country club members who had already spilled onto the portico to witness my mother and sister being forcibly ejected. I instructed my driver to head straight back to Buckhead. Malik continued to sleep against my chest, blissfully unaware of the absolute war zone we had just left. My pulse was steady, but my mind was running through a million permutations of Connor's parting threat. He was a desperate drowning man, but desperate men with access to digital infrastructure could cause catastrophic damage. The drive was a blur of calculating potential offshore tax liabilities and federal evasion penalties. When the wrought iron gates of my estate parted, I expected the familiar quiet sanctuary of my home. Instead, as the car pulled up the circular driveway, a stark white envelope broke the flawless symmetry of my mahogany front doors. It was taped directly over the brass handle. I did not wait for the driver to open my door. I stepped out, my heels clicking sharply against the stone pavers, and approached the entryway. The envelope bore the unmistakable sterile branding of the Department of the Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service. I tore it open. It was a formal notice of audit and criminal investigation. Connor had not been bluffing. He had pulled the trigger. I walked inside, locked the deadbolts, and handed Malik over to the nanny who was waiting in the foyer. I gave her strict instructions not to open the door for anyone under any circumstances. I marched straight into my home office, stripping off the emerald Tom Ford jacket and throwing it over a leather chair. I sat down at my glass desk and woke up my custom-built terminal. If the federal government believed I was the architect of a multi-million-dollar tax evasion scheme, I had to dismantle their entire premise before they froze my legitimate assets. I booted up my encrypted tracing software and tapped directly into the global corporate registry databases. I needed the name of the offshore entity Connor had screamed about. I ran a reverse search on my own social security number, bypassing the standard domestic credit bureaus and digging into international corporate filings. It took me 34 minutes to find the cancer he had planted. The company was registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Global Holdings. I pulled the incorporation documents and the subsequent tax filings for the past 12 months. What I saw made my blood run ice cold. Connor had not simply slapped my signature on a single form in a moment of panic. He had spent an entire year meticulously constructing a fake paper trail. He had created a massive fabricated corporate history that positioned Apex Global Holdings as a subsidiary of my legitimate financial auditing firm. I scrutinized the ledger. Connor had routed millions of dollars of undocumented income from his various failed domestic shell companies directly into this Cayman account. He had categorized the deposits as consulting fees paid to my firm. Then he had systematically drained the account, moving the untaxed funds into decentralized cryptocurrency wallets that were nearly impossible to trace. By tying my signature and my firm's federal tax identification number to the Cayman entity, he had engineered the perfect fall guy. On paper, to an untrained IRS investigator, it looked exactly like I had used my expertise in forensic accounting to build an invisible offshore tax haven. He had framed me using the very skills I used to hunt criminals just like him. The sheer scale of the frame job was staggering. Connor was mathematically incompetent when it came to running a legitimate business, but he possessed the cunning, predatory instinct of a career con artist. He had fabricated board meeting minutes, forged quarterly earnings reports, and generated fake email correspondence between Apex Global and my firm. He had constructed an alternate reality so dense with fabricated data that dismantling it would take months of relentless legal warfare. And the IRS did not wait months. They froze assets first and asked questions later. If I did not neutralize this threat immediately, the federal government would seize my accounts, freeze my business operations, and potentially issue an indictment. I picked up my phone and dialed Valerie on her direct encrypted line. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with professional urgency. She had already received my previous email regarding the country club fraud, but I needed her to pivot immediately. "Valerie," I said, keeping my voice stripped of all panic, "we have a massive escalation. Connor did not just steal my identity for a domestic loan. He registered a Cayman Islands holding company using my credentials and has been funneling untaxed capital through it for a year. The IRS just taped a criminal audit notice to my front door." I heard the rapid clacking of her mechanical keyboard as she immediately opened a secure portal. "Give me the entity name," she demanded. "Apex Global Holdings," I replied. I listened to her type, the silence stretching for several agonizing minutes as she accessed the federal filing repository. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual calm, detached legal cadence. It was replaced by a sharp edge of genuine alarm. Zora Valerie said slowly, emphasizing every syllable. I am looking at the federal filings for Apex Global. Connor's forgery is incredibly thorough, but a digital paper trail is not what triggered the immediate criminal investigation. The IRS does not initiate a full-scale raid based solely on a suspicious offshore registration. They need corroborating evidence to move this fast. What kind of corroborating evidence? I demanded, my eyes scanning the fake ledger on my screen. They have a sworn affidavit, Valerie stated, the weight of the revelation crashing through the phone. Somebody physically walked into a federal tax office, presented their state identification, and signed a sworn notarized legal document authenticating all of these fake corporate records. They sat down with an IRS agent and testified under penalty of perjury that you are the sole architect of this tax evasion ring. My breath caught in my throat. Connor could forge a signature on a digital document from a laptop, but he could not walk into a federal building and pretend to be me or one of my corporate officers. He needed an accomplice. He needed someone whose identity and connection to me were legitimate enough to bypass federal scrutiny and authenticate the lie. Who signed the affidavit, Valerie? I asked, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of my glass desk. Who swore to the federal government that I committed this crime? I heard the rustle of paper as she pulled up the digital scan of the final page. It was your mother, Zora, Valerie said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Brenda Hayes signed the affidavit. She is listed as the primary cooperating witness for the federal prosecution against you. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brenda Hayes signed the affidavit. She is listed as the primary cooperating witness for the federal prosecution against you. I stared at the digitized federal document glowing on my secondary monitor. I zoomed in on the final page. There it was. My mother's looping, overly stylized signature stamped and authenticated by a federal notary public. She had not simply nodded along to Connor's lies in the privacy of her own living room. She had actively driven to a federal building. She had presented her state-issued identification. She had sat across a desk from an agent of the Internal Revenue Service, looked them dead in the eye, and sworn under penalty of perjury that her own daughter was the mastermind of an international tax evasion syndicate. Valerie's voice broke through the silence, sharp and laced with unprecedented urgency. Zora, you need to understand the exact level of legal jeopardy you are in right now. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division does not play games. They do not send polite letters asking for clarification when they suspect offshore tax evasion on this scale. They operate on a presumption of guilt. I know how the CID operates, Valerie, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They are building a case for Title 26, Section 7201, tax evasion, and likely money laundering. Exactly, Valerie fired back, and Connor just handed them the perfect wrapped package, an elaborate digital paper trail tying your firm to the Cayman accounts, and a highly credible witness authenticating the documents. The federal government looks at this and sees a patriotic, heartbroken mother making the agonizing decision to turn in her corrupt, greedy daughter. That affidavit gives them ironclad probable cause. They are not just going to audit you, Zora. They are going to secure a warrant. They will raid your offices. They will seize your servers. They will freeze every single legitimate asset, bank account, and trust fund tied to your Social Security number. You will not have the capital to fight them, and you will not have the capital to protect your son. The absolute chilling perfection of Connor's strategy finally clicked into place. He was a spectacular failure in the business world, but he possessed the lethal predatory instincts of a career con artist. He knew that digital forgeries could eventually be unraveled by a skilled forensic auditor like myself. But he also knew that the federal justice system was driven by human narratives. A fake ledger was just data. A weeping cooperative mother testifying against her daughter was a conviction. Brenda had willingly offered herself as the linchpin of my destruction. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, the pieces of my mother's psychological puzzle snapping together with sickening clarity. She had not done this because she genuinely believed I was a criminal. She had done this to protect Connor, and by extension to protect her own delusional social standing. When Connor's fraudulent empire began collapsing, when he needed a scapegoat to take the fall for his massive offshore debts, he had gone to Brenda. He had likely spun a tragic tale convincing her that I had somehow manipulated his finances, that I was the reason he was bankrupt. And Brenda had swallowed the lie whole because the alternative was facing the devastating reality that her golden child was married to a broke, unemployed fraud. She was perfectly willing to send me to a federal penitentiary for decades. She was perfectly willing to see my newborn son ripped away from me and placed into the foster system. She traded my absolute freedom simply to ensure she did not have to face her sorority sisters and admit her son-in-law was a failure. She sacrificed my life to maintain a country club facade that I had just publicly burned to the ground. Zora Valerie said, her tone shifting into aggressive legal strategy. I need your authorization to file an immediate emergency injunction in federal court. We need to submit counter affidavits. We need to block the CID from executing any asset freezes by demonstrating clear evidence of identity theft. I will draft a motion to compel the production of Connor's original IP logs. We are going to bury them in defensive paperwork. No, I said. The single word cut through the panic. Valerie paused. Excuse me, Zora. If we do not file defensive motions immediately, the IRS will lock you out of your own life by Friday. If we file defensive motions, we engage them in a paper war. I explained my forensic mind completely taking over, suppressing the emotional trauma of my mother's betrayal and replacing it with pure tactical calculation. If I send you into federal court screaming fraud, Connor will immediately lawyer up. He will hide behind the Fifth Amendment. Brenda will play the confused, manipulated elderly mother. It will take months, possibly years, to untangle a Cayman Islands shell company while my assets remain frozen under federal investigation. I cannot fight a shadow war with the IRS while protecting an infant. Then what is your objective? Valerie demanded. I need them to confess. I stated, my eyes locked on the digital signature of the woman who had birthed me. I need undeniable, unassailable audio and visual proof of their conspiracy. I need Connor to openly admit that he forged the offshore documents, and I need Brenda to openly admit that she perjured herself to the federal government to protect him. I need them to say it out loud on the record. Zora. They are narcissistic sociopaths, Valerie argued. They just committed multiple federal felonies. They are never going to willingly sit down and confess to an auditor. They will not confess to an auditor. I agreed, a cold, dangerous smile spreading across my face. But they will absolutely gloat to a victim. I stood up from the glass desk and began pacing the length of my office. Narcissists cannot resist a victory lap, Valerie. Connor was just publicly humiliated. He was physically dragged out of the Peachtree Elite Country Club in front of Atlanta's highest society. Brenda just lost her VIP membership and her entire social identity. They are currently sitting in whatever cheap hotel they retreated to, nursing massive bleeding ego wounds. They are desperate to feel powerful again. If I attack them legally, their defense mechanisms will engage. They will lock down. I stopped pacing and stared out the window into the dark, manicured grounds of my estate. But if I break, I continued softly. If I completely surrender, if I go to them weeping, terrified and defeated, begging for mercy because the big, scary IRS notice on my door broke my spirit, they will not be able to resist the opportunity to stand over me and explain exactly how brilliant they were to orchestrate my downfall. They want my submission more than they want my money. I am going to give it to them. Valerie let out a long, heavy breath through the speaker. You are talking about wearing a wire, Zora. If you orchestrate a meeting and attempt to solicit a confession, and they interpret it as you offering a bribe to change federal testimony that is witness tampering, you are playing a very dangerous game with people who have nothing left to lose. I am playing a game I designed, I corrected her. I am not going to offer them a bribe. I am going to offer them a total surrender. I walked back to my desk and opened a new blank document. Valerie, I need you to draft a highly specific, legally binding settlement agreement. I want it written in thick, aggressive legalese. The terms should dictate that I am willingly transferring the deed of my Buckhead estate and all liquid capital within my primary checking accounts directly into Connor Sterling's name. In exchange, the document must state that Connor will dissolve the Apex Global Holdings debt, and Brenda Hayes will formally retract her IRS affidavit. Valerie was silent for 3 seconds. You want me to draft a document giving them your entire life. It is a prop, Valerie. It is bait. I am going to call my mother. I am going to cry. I am going to tell her the federal audit notice terrified me, that my lawyers told me I am going to prison, and that I am willing to sign over my entire estate to Connor if they just call off the IRS. They will demand to meet me to secure the paperwork. And when they do, Valerie asked, her voice laced with both apprehension and awe, I will make sure every single word they say is transmitted directly to a secure cloud server, I replied. Draft the surrender document, Valerie. Have it in my inbox in 1 hour. I terminated the call. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and bypassed the stack of standard office supplies. I reached into the hidden biometric safe compartment and pulled out a heavy matte black burner phone, the device I kept strictly for communicating with private investigators during hostile corporate takeovers. I dialed my mother's cell phone number. I cleared my throat, forcing my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let my voice tremble, adopting the exact submissive, terrified tone of the broken scapegoat they had always demanded I be. It was time to draw the predators out of the dark. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. I knew she would not pick up. Brenda Hayes never answered the first call during a crisis. It was a power play she had perfected decades ago. She let it go to voicemail so she could control the narrative, forcing the caller to wait in agonizing suspense while she decided when or if she would grant them an audience. When the automated beep finally sounded, I closed my eyes and dug deep into the very real, visceral pain of my childhood. I channeled the terrified little girl who just wanted her mother to love and protect her. Mom, please pick up, I sobbed, making sure my voice cracked sharply on the second word. I forced a hyperventilating gasp into the receiver, making it sound as though I was struggling to breathe. I just got home. There is a notice from the Internal Revenue Service taped to my front door. It says Criminal Investigation Division. Mom, they are talking about offshore accounts and federal tax evasion. I do not understand what is happening. Connor was screaming at me at the club. He said he used my name for his businesses. I am so scared. My lawyers are telling me I could go to federal prison. Please, you have to help me. I cannot lose Malik. I cannot go to jail. Please, Mom, I am begging you. Can we just settle this as a family? I will give Connor whatever he wants to fix this. Just call me back. Please. I tapped the red end call button on the screen and immediately dropped the trembling, hysterical facade. My heart rate slowed back to a steady, rhythmic beat. I placed the black burner phone flat on the glass surface of my desk and stared at the dark screen. The silence in my home office was absolute. Now I waited. I knew the psychological profile of the woman who had raised me better than I knew my own reflection. Brenda was a textbook covert narcissist. Her entire sense of self-worth was derived from her perceived superiority over me and her absolute control over Chantel. For my entire life, my accomplishments had been a direct threat to her fragile ego. When I graduated at the top of my university class, she complained loudly to our relatives about the cost of the graduation dinner. When I bought my first luxury vehicle with my own money, she whispered to the neighbors that I was drowning in predatory lease payments. My independence was a constant burning insult to her. But my pain, my submission, my utter defeat, that was her absolute favorite drug. By leaving that frantic begging voicemail, I had essentially handed her a mainline dose of pure narcissistic supply. She would listen to that recording. She would likely play it out loud for Chantel and Connor, basking in the warm glow of having finally broken the defiant, arrogant daughter who had publicly humiliated them at the country club just hours prior. Her ego would completely override any basic sense of self-preservation or legal caution. She would not be able to resist the opportunity to look me in the eye while I handed over my entire empire. My encrypted desktop monitor chimed with an incoming notification. It was Valerie. True to her word, she had drafted the settlement agreement in under an hour. I opened the secure PDF attachment and began to read. It was a masterpiece of aggressive, predatory legalese. On paper, it was a total, unconditional financial surrender. It legally transferred the title of my Buckhead estate, along with liquid control of my 3 primary domestic checking accounts, directly into Connor Sterling's corporate portfolio. But in the fine print buried beneath pages of dense asset transfer clauses was the trap. Paragraph 7 explicitly stated that this transfer of wealth was in direct exchange for Connor Sterling dissolving the fraudulent Cayman Islands entity known as Apex Global Holdings, and Brenda Hayes formally retracting her sworn federal affidavit regarding my involvement in the same company. It was not a settlement. It was a written, legally binding confession wrapped in a bow. If they signed this document, they were putting their federal crimes in ink. I printed 3 copies on the heavy watermarked paper I typically reserved for high-level corporate acquisitions. I placed them inside a sleek black leather portfolio. I needed the visual presentation of my defeat to look as official and terrifying as possible. The sun dipped below the tree line outside my office window, casting long, dark shadows across the manicured lawn of my estate. I remained at my desk, perfectly still, watching the burner phone. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Brenda was intentionally stretching out the silence, ensuring I was stewing in my own manufactured terror. She wanted me desperate. She wanted me so panicked that I would be willing to sign away my life without reading a single line of the fine print. Finally, at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, the screen of the burner phone illuminated the dark office. A single text message from Brenda had arrived. I did not lunge for the device. I picked it up slowly, swiping open the notification. The message was cold, transactional, and dripping with unearned, arrogant authority. Your behavior today was shameful. You embarrassed this family and you brought this IRS situation entirely upon yourself with your arrogant financial games. Connor is furious, but I have convinced him to hear you out. Come to his downtown office tomorrow at exactly noon. Bring the deed to your Buckhead house and all your banking information. If you sign the property over to Chantel as collateral, Connor will make the IRS problem go away. Do not be late. We are your only way out of this. I read the text twice, memorizing the sheer breathtaking audacity of her words. She was actively extorting me. She was using the threat of a federal prison sentence, a threat she had personally manufactured through perjury, to steal my home and hand it to her golden child. There was no maternal conflict. There was no hesitation. She was ready to completely destroy my life and my son's future just to fund Chantel's designer lifestyle and Connor's failing business ventures. I typed my response, keeping the language brief and perfectly aligned with the pathetic, broken persona I was projecting. I will be there at noon. I have all the paperwork printed. Please, Mom, just make sure Connor does not let them take me to jail. I am so sorry. I hit send. I watched the tiny delivery receipt appear beneath the text bubble. The bait had been taken. The trap was fully set. They believed they held all the cards. They believed I was walking into their territory tomorrow as a helpless victim ready to be slaughtered for their financial gain. They expected me to show up alone, crying and desperate to sign whatever they placed in front of me to save myself from federal agents. I powered down the burner phone and locked it back inside the biometric safe. I reached for my primary device and pulled up my secure contacts list. I tapped Valerie's name. We are on for noon tomorrow at Connor's downtown office, I said the moment she answered the line. Valerie exhaled sharply. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this face-to-face, Zora? We can send the documents via courier and record their signatures remotely. Walking into his office puts you in a highly volatile environment. Connor is already backed into a corner. He needs to see me break. I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. If I send a courier, his paranoia will spike. He will have his own lawyers review the document, and they will spot paragraph 7 immediately. But if I hand it to him myself while I am sobbing and begging for my life, his narcissism will blind him. He will sign it, just to watch me suffer. I heard Valerie typing rapidly on her end. I am contracting the private security team right now. I want 2 plainclothes operators in the lobby of his building and 1 in the hallway outside his suite. You will be wearing a military-grade audio and video transmitter. It will be stitched directly into the lining of your blazer. The feed will upload to our secure offshore servers in real time. Even if he figures out what you are doing and destroys the physical camera, the data will already be locked in the cloud. Make sure the audio is crystal clear, I instructed. I need the microphone sensitive enough to pick up every single word Brenda says. I want the federal prosecutor to hear her exact tone of voice when she admits to perjuring herself. It will pick up a pin drop, Valerie assured me. I will meet you at the safe house at 9 in the morning to fit the equipment. Get some sleep, Zora. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. I terminated the call. I stood up from my desk and walked out of the office, moving down the long hallway toward the nursery. I opened the door silently. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of a nightlight. Malik was sleeping soundly in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in a perfect, peaceful rhythm. I stood over him for a long time, watching him breathe. My family had tried to use my love for him as a weapon against me. They had tried to leverage my maternal fear to steal my wealth. I reached down and gently brushed my thumb against his soft cheek. I was going to Connor's office tomorrow at noon, exactly as requested, but I was absolutely not going alone. The GPS navigation on my phone announced that I had reached my destination. I looked out the tinted window of the town car I had hired for the morning. I did not want my personal driver or my Maybach associated with this zip code. Connor's business address was located in a sprawling, desolate stretch of suburban decay just outside the city limits. The strip mall was a monument to failure. The asphalt parking lot was cratered with massive potholes and choked with aggressively stubborn weeds pushing through the cracked concrete. A flickering neon sign for a discount liquor store buzzed loudly, casting a harsh, artificial glare over the adjacent storefronts. Sandwiched directly between a defunct pawn shop with barred windows and a discount nail salon smelling faintly of acetone was a narrow glass door. Flimsy white vinyl lettering had been stuck to the glass. It read Sterling Financial Consulting. Some of the letters were already peeling at the edges. This was the prestigious corporate headquarters Connor had endlessly bragged about at family dinners. This was the epicenter of his phantom wealth. It was nothing but a cheap month-to-month commercial lease in a dead retail plaza. I reached up and adjusted the lapel of my charcoal silk blazer. Beneath the bespoke fabric, the military-grade audio and visual transmitter hummed silently, perfectly synchronized with Valerie's secure offshore servers. 2 plainclothes private security contractors were already positioned outside. One was sitting in an unmarked sedan across the lot. The other was browsing a magazine outside the liquor store. They had strict orders not to intervene unless my physical safety was compromised. I took a deep breath and completely lowered my heart rate. I pulled my shoulders forward, letting my posture cave inward. I allowed my eyes to widen actively, manufacturing a look of sleep-deprived panic. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, forcing genuine tears to well up in the corners of my eyes. I was no longer a forensic auditor. I was a terrified, beaten woman on the verge of losing everything. I pushed the glass door open. A cheap brass bell chimed overhead, the sound thin and tinny. The interior of the office was even more depressing than the facade. The air was stale, smelling of cheap carpet cleaner and old coffee. Faux wood paneling lined the walls, peeling at the baseboards. A massive, ostentatious faux leather executive desk dominated the cramped room, looking entirely absurd in the tiny, dingy space. Connor sat behind that desk, leaning back in a squeaky, overstuffed chair with his hands steepled beneath his chin. He was wearing a shiny, ill-fitting suit that strained at the buttons. He looked at me with an expression of supreme predatory arrogance. He genuinely believed he was a mastermind. To his right, perched on a sagging synthetic velvet sofa, sat Brenda and Chantel. They were the picture of grotesque celebration. Chantel held a plastic champagne flute filled with pale, cheap, sparkling wine. Brenda held the bottle, pouring herself another heavy serving. They were grinning, the sheer, unfiltered joy radiating from their faces at the sight of my manufactured tears was deeply sickening. I stood near the door, clutching my designer handbag tightly to my chest, letting my hands tremble visibly. "You are exactly on time," Connor noted, his voice dripping with condescension. He gestured to a flimsy folding chair positioned directly in front of his desk. "Have a seat, Zora. Let us discuss your future." I took slow, hesitant steps forward and sank into the uncomfortable chair. I looked at my mother. "Mom, please," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "You cannot do this. You know those documents are fake. You know I have never heard of Apex Global. Why did you tell the IRS that I set it up?" Brenda took a slow sip from her plastic flute, her eyes gleaming with malice. She crossed her legs, looking completely at ease in the squalid office. "You brought this upon yourself, Zora." Brenda stated, her tone lecturing and cold. "You have been arrogant your entire life. You thought you were better than us. You thought you could humiliate me, humiliate your own flesh and blood in front of the entire country club and just walk away. You needed to be taught a lesson about family loyalty. Connor is simply protecting his assets. He is doing what a real man does. You should have been more cooperative." I swallowed hard, forcing another tear to spill over my lashes. It was captured in high definition by the camera hidden in my lapel. "But they will take Malik," I sobbed, pitching my voice higher, leaning into the maternal desperation they expected. "If I go to federal prison for tax evasion, I will lose my son." "Chantel, please. You are my sister. How can you sit there and drink champagne while they threaten to lock me in a cage?" Chantel laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that echoed off the cheap paneling. "Oh, please stop with the dramatics," Zora Chantel sneered, twirling her plastic glass. "You are not going to jail as long as you do exactly what Connor says. And frankly, this is just the universe balancing the scales. You have been hoarding all that money in Buckhead while we struggled. It is disgusting. Do you know how humiliating it is to drive a leased car while my sister lives in a gated mansion? I am already looking at paint swatches for the main living room. I think we will go with a stark white. And I am ripping out that ridiculous nursery. It is going to be my new shoe closet." The raw, unfiltered cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She was openly discussing destroying my infant son's room while aiding and abetting a federal extortion scheme. Valerie was going to have a field day with this audio. I turned my attention back to Connor, clasping my hands tightly together on my lap. "What do you want, Connor?" I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. "The voicemail said you could make the audit go away." "How? The IRS is already involved. They left a notice on my door." Connor leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on the cheap desk. The chair squealed in protest under his weight. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. "The IRS only has what we gave them, Zora," Connor explained slowly, enunciating his words as if speaking to a child. "I built the paper trail. I created Apex Global Holdings. I tied it to your firm. It is a masterpiece of corporate restructuring. And your mother provided the sworn testimony they needed to open the criminal file. But the file is still in the preliminary stages. The agents have not executed the asset freeze yet. They are waiting for the final authenticated ledger showing the exact flow of funds into the crypto wallets." He paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the stale air. "I have that ledger right here on my hard drive," he continued. "All it takes is one click and it goes straight to the lead investigator. If I send it, they will be at your door with a battering ram by Friday morning. But if Brenda officially contacts the agent and retracts her affidavit claiming she was confused by the corporate documents, the entire investigation loses its primary witness. The foundation crumbles. The CID will drop the case because they will not have the resources to pursue a dead end without a cooperating informant. We hold the kill switch, Zora." I looked down at my hands, shaking my head in manufactured disbelief. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked, ensuring my microphone picked up every syllable. You stole millions of dollars. You evaded taxes. Why are you trying to ruin my life to cover your own crimes? Because you have capital and I need capital, Connor stated bluntly, completely abandoning any pretense of innocence. It is just business. You have a massive, fully paid-off estate in Buckhead, and you have millions in liquid cash sitting in domestic accounts. I need that property, and I need that cash to cover my upcoming liabilities. You are going to give it all to me. He reached into the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them onto the desk. They slid across the faux wood surface and stopped inches from my trembling hands. I looked down at the top page. It was a standard quitclaim deed specifically drafted to transfer the total ownership of my Buckhead estate entirely over to Chantel Sterling. Beneath it was a series of irrevocable wire transfer authorizations, directing my bank to drain my primary accounts into Connor's LLC. Connor picked up a cheap plastic pen and held it out to me. His eyes were cold dead and entirely devoid of human empathy. Sign the house over to Chantel or the rest of the forged documents go to the feds. I stared down at the cheap blue plastic pen Connor was holding out to me. My hand trembled violently as I reached across the expanse of his absurdly oversized desk to take it from his sweaty grip. I let out a jagged, broken breath, allowing my shoulders to collapse completely inward. I lowered my head, fixing my gaze on the faded, stained carpet beneath my feet, projecting the absolute picture of a defeated, broken woman who had finally been backed into a corner she could not audit her way out of. I just do not understand, I whispered, forcing a fresh wave of tears to spill over my lower lashes. My voice was thick, wet, and thoroughly laced with surrender. I build biometric security protocols for international banks, Connor. I trace invisible, decentralized money across the globe. I have spent a decade learning how to lock down financial perimeters against highly sophisticated syndicates. How did you bypass all of it? How did you beat me? The effect on Connor was instantaneous and intoxicating to witness. His chest puffed out, straining the cheap fabric of his synthetic suit jacket. The massive, fragile ego that had driven him to bankruptcy and fraud was suddenly being stroked by the very woman he deeply resented for being genuinely successful. He leaned back in his squeaky chair, lacing his fingers together behind his head, a smug, impossibly arrogant smile stretching across his face. You rely entirely too much on software, Zora. Connor boasted, his voice loud and booming, ensuring his supposed brilliance filled the small, dingy room. You think because you can read a digital ledger you understand how the world works. But software has blind spots. Software assumes that the physical documentation submitted to the state is legitimate. I did not try to hack your servers, I just bypassed them entirely. He unlaced his fingers and leaned forward, eager to educate me on his genius. I registered Apex Global Holdings in the Cayman Islands using a local registered agent who does not ask questions. Then I set up 3 domestic LLCs here in Georgia. I routed the initial capital from my remaining investors through those 3 domestic shells, creating a wash cycle. Once the money was sufficiently anonymized, I wired it to the Apex account, categorizing the transfers as international consulting invoices billed by your forensic accounting firm. I used your publicly available federal tax identification number. By the time the money hit the offshore crypto wallets, it looked exactly like you were laundering your own corporate profits to dodge the IRS. I kept my head bowed desperately, suppressing the cold, triumphant smile fighting to break across my face. My blazer lapel was positioned perfectly. The military-grade transmitter was capturing every single syllable of his unprompted, highly detailed confession, streaming it directly to the secure offshore servers Valerie was monitoring. But I needed more. I needed the final fatal nail in their collective coffin. But the Internal Revenue Service does not initiate a Tier 1 criminal investigation based on automated wire transfers, I sobbed, gripping the edges of the quitclaim deed on the desk. They require physical authenticated verification. They require a wet signature from a corporate officer to bind the offshore entity to a domestic citizen. You cannot just forge a signature on a PDF and trigger an audit. How did you get past the identity verification? Brenda let out a loud, theatrical sigh from the sagging velvet sofa. She set her plastic champagne flute down on a cheap glass side table and stood up, smoothing the front of her designer knockoff skirt. She walked over to the desk, standing right beside Connor, looking down at me with absolute unfiltered disdain. "I did it," Brenda stated, her voice ringing with sick, twisted pride. She was physically incapable of letting Connor take all the credit for my destruction. I looked up at her, my eyes wide with manufactured betrayal. "Mom, you forged my signature." "I did not just forge it," Brenda bragged, crossing her arms over her chest. "I practiced it for 3 weeks until I could replicate your exact pen stroke. Then I drove directly to the federal building downtown. I walked into the IRS field office and sat down with a special agent. I presented my state identification. I looked that man dead in the eye and I swore under penalty of perjury that I had personally discovered these documents in your home. I testified that you confessed the entire tax evasion scheme to me and that my conscience simply could not bear the weight of your crimes." Chantel giggled from the sofa, pouring herself another glass of cheap sparkling wine. "It was beautiful, Zora." They took one look at a heartbroken, concerned mother, turning in her greedy, corrupt daughter, and they believed every single word. "You think you are untouchable because you have money, but we completely outsmarted you." Brenda leaned over the desk, tapping a manicured fingernail sharply against the quitclaim deed. "Now stop crying and sign the document, Zora. Sign the Buckhead estate over to Chantel. Authorize the wire transfers to Connor, and I will call the federal agent this afternoon. I will tell them I made a terrible mistake and misread the corporate documents. We will make the audit disappear. But if you hesitate, you are going to federal prison and Malik goes into state custody." The room felt completely silent save for the hum of the failing air conditioning unit above us. They watched me, 3 predators waiting for their prey to finally capitulate. They wanted the signature. They wanted the wealth. But most of all, they wanted my absolute submission. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs. The frantic, terrified trembling in my hands ceased entirely. I unhunched my shoulders, straightening my spine until I was sitting perfectly upright in the flimsy folding chair. I reached up and wiped the single tear from my cheek, my expression shifting from broken despair to absolute glacial zero. The sudden, severe change in my posture made Connor blink. His smug smile faltered slightly as his primitive instincts registered that the prey had suddenly stopped acting like prey. I picked up the cheap blue pen. I did not look at the quitclaim deed. I looked directly into Connor's eyes, holding his gaze with a cold, terrifying intensity. I pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line at the bottom of the page. With sharp, aggressive strokes, I wrote 3 words in massive, bold capital letters across the entire document: null and void. I tossed the pen onto the desk. It clattered against the faux wood. Connor looked down at the paper. His brain struggled to process the bold, defiant letters ruining his flawless extortion attempt. The color rapidly drained from his face, replaced instantly by a violently flushed, blotchy red. The realization that he had not broken me, that I had walked into his office and blatantly defied a federal threat, shattered his fragile reality. "What is this?" Connor roared, his voice cracking with sudden explosive rage. "It is your confession, Connor," I replied, my voice ringing with crisp, lethal authority. "And it just uploaded to a secure federal server." Connor let out an incoherent scream of pure, unadulterated fury. He kicked his heavy desk chair backward. It slammed into the wall as he lunged across the desk, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat to physically destroy the woman who had just outsmarted him. He never made it across the desk. The cheap glass door of the strip mall office did not just open. It was violently kicked inward with such concussive force that the glass shattered within the aluminum frame, raining down onto the stained carpet like ice. "Atlanta Police Department. Hands in the air right now." Detective Jordan stormed into the cramped room, his service weapon drawn and leveled directly at Connor's chest. He was wearing a heavy tactical vest flanked immediately by 3 federal agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, wearing dark blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering across their backs. The sheer overwhelming force of the tactical breach froze the room in absolute terror. Connor's forward momentum collapsed. He threw his hands into the air, his eyes wide with visceral panic, as a federal agent grabbed him by the back of his suit jacket, spun him around and slammed him face first against the faux wood paneling. The sharp metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoed through the office as Connor was instantly neutralized and detained. Chantel let out an ear-piercing shriek, dropping her champagne flute. The glass shattered, mixing with the spilled wine on the floor. She scrambled backward on the velvet sofa, pulling her knees to her chest, sobbing hysterically as a second federal agent moved in to secure the perimeter. Brenda backed away from the desk, her hands raised, trembling so violently she looked as though she might vibrate out of her own skin. The narcissistic survival instinct honed over decades of manipulating reality kicked in with horrifying speed. She took one look at her son-in-law pinned against the wall in federal handcuffs and instantly recognized that the ship was sinking. "I did not know what I was signing," Brenda screamed, pointing a frantic, shaking finger directly at Connor and Chantel. "He forced me to do it. Connor made me go to the federal building. Chantel planned the whole thing. I am a victim. They manipulated me. I swear to God I had no idea it was fraud." She turned on her own flesh and blood without a single second of hesitation. She threw her golden child to the wolves to save her own skin. I stood up smoothly from the folding chair. I brushed a speck of invisible dust from my charcoal blazer, entirely unfazed by the chaos and screaming surrounding me. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a second, significantly thicker envelope. It bore the seal of my premier legal team. I walked over to where Brenda was cowering against the wall, desperately trying to convince a stone-faced IRS agent of her fabricated innocence. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical rambling. She snapped her head toward me, her eyes wide, silently begging me to intervene to save her from the monster she had created. I held the thick envelope out to her. She took it automatically, her hands shaking. "That is not a federal indictment," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and polite. "That is a civil lawsuit. My legal team filed it this morning. We are suing you for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and severe financial damages resulting from your perjury." Brenda stared at the envelope, her jaw trembling. "Zora, please, you cannot do this to me." Valerie was incredibly thorough. I continued, ignoring her plea completely. "We secured a judge's order an hour ago. There is currently a hard, impenetrable legal lien placed upon your house in Fairfield. We also placed a lien on your entire state pension. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your retirement is gone. Your home will be seized to satisfy the civil damages you caused me today. You are completely and utterly destitute." Brenda let out a low, guttural wail, sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the stained carpet, clutching the civil suit to her chest. The reality of her absolute, uncompromising ruin had finally arrived. I looked down at her one last time. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt nothing but the clean, sterile closure of a ledger being permanently balanced. "You told me failures do not belong in your family," I said quietly. "You were right. Enjoy bankruptcy court, Brenda." I turned my back on the screaming, the handcuffs, and the shattered glass. I walked out of the dingy strip mall office and stepped into the blinding, brilliant Atlanta sun. My hired town car was waiting, the engine purring smoothly. I slid into the back seat, instructing the driver to take me back to my flawless estate. I was going home to hold my son in absolute undisturbed peace, the ultimate victor of a war I had finally finished. The ultimate lesson here is that sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to exploit, manipulate, or destroy your peace. For years, this family weaponized loyalty, assuming their target would blindly accept abuse to maintain a fragile facade of unity. However, true security comes from absolute independence, both emotional and financial. By refusing to play the victim and strategically documenting their crimes, we learn that you cannot negotiate with toxic narcissists. You can only outsmart them. Blood makes you related, but character makes you family. Sometimes the most empowering boundary is simply letting predators face the devastating consequences of their own actions. Share your own stories of setting hard boundaries with toxic relatives in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering tales of justice and survival.